2 weeks of action in the books. We are heading into week 3 and we are going to walk you through the rankings and tiers you need to know to set your lineups at the running back position. Tom, we are starting to establish ourselves a pattern. We are understanding usage. We are understanding workloads. These 3 at the top, they feel very much established. Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, and of course, Saquon Barkley. 3 studs, 3 huge workloads, and 3 pretty decent matchups this week.
Yeah, I mean, Bijan gets to take on the Carolina Panthers, which is good news for anyone who gets to take on the Carolina Panthers. I think the only question becomes how much does Tyler Algier play? But Bijan is used so much in the receiving game that it's kind of fine, and we don't really need to have any worries there. Christian McCaffrey, just a monster workload with even Mac Jones at quarterback. He had the offense working enough on time that it didn't affect McCaffrey particularly. Yes, Brian Robinson is mixing in a little bit, but not to the point where we need to really worry about it. And this week, they're at home to the Cardinals. I would assume that once again, they're going to try and flow the game through Christian McCaffrey. And then Saquon Barkley, who plays the Rams. Last time Saquon Barkley played the Rams in the playoffs, he had some pretty impressive touchdowns in the snow. Last week wasn't necessarily overly impressive. Like, it was fine by Saquon standards, but against the Chiefs, it felt like there was maybe not the best game. But the Eagles are just going so run heavy. Like, they've opened 2025 averaging 22.5 pass attempts per game. Last year, they averaged 27 pass attempts per game. They're just leaning further and further into the run, and I have no worries about Saquon in any matchup.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. They feel primed for huge weeks. Moving into the A tier, we kick it off with the running back 1 overall, James Cook. Do you expect him to continue his incredible, stellar performance this week? Of course, we are recording this before Thursday Night Football, so whatever you say, people will know the answer.
Well, I mean, myself and Tyler put together a pick'em slip today on Wednesday looking at the best lines, and it was just like, well, how do you not take James Cook to score a touchdown? He scored 24 touchdowns in his last 21 games played. The Miami defense has allowed the 8th most rushing yards so far, giving up the 9th highest explosive run rate, the 10th highest touchdown rate. So, yeah, everything points towards James Cook having a good week against Miami. And if you're watching this after this, I really hope that you have made some money on the back of it.
Absolutely. And then rounding out the A tier, it feels like these guys are all just plug and play, and you could probably make an argument for each of these in the S tier. Bucky Irving, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Devon Achane, and Jahmyr Gibbs.
I think Bucky's the one who gives me the most concern because, like, the Bucs are playing without both the starting tackles at the minute, and things haven't necessarily looked particularly smooth. And Rachaad White looked good last week. Rachaad White got hot. And one thing that hasn't necessarily been the case with Rachaad White is his efficiency over the years, but he was rushing well. And I think that has the potential to always just nibble slightly into what Bucky is doing. But against the Jets, with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, there's every chance that the Bucs can control this game enough to give Bucky more work. Jonathan Taylor is probably the guy who maybe I've been a little hesitant to push him further, but because I was out on him in the offseason, but now you look at what he's doing, he's getting used in such a better way than he's ever been used before. He's playing on pure passing downs, which hasn't always been the case because he wasn't always a great pass catching running back, but right now he looks it. Derrick Henry coming off probably his worst game as a Baltimore Raven, but now gets to play the Lions, who are a decent rush defense. It's not like they've been hammered by running backs so far, but in a game with 50 points over under in Baltimore, you've kind of got to lean into it. Devon Achane, the receiving work just continues to be incredible, even if the offense is just miserable. And then Jahmyr Gibbs, kind of like Henry, we've seen one good game, one bad game, but I have no worries about starting any of these guys.
Yeah, I think the thing, just to touch briefly on Jonathan Taylor, you mentioned there, the hit on him has always been in the receiving game, and he's always had to leave the field because he's not been a good enough catching back. That's not really changed. What's changed is that he has become one of the best pass protecting backs in the entire league. He is doing a phenomenal job this year. And yes, okay, it hasn't turned into targets because he's having to stay in and block. You know, last week he was down at a 6% target share. But because he's so good, it means he's not leaving the field, which means, he saw 100% running back rush share last week. He was on the field for 93% of snaps. Like, that's amazing. That's why he's able to produce these phenomenal fantasy days, because he's not leaving the field. And you'd like to think that hopefully he sees a slight uptick in that receiving workload through not leaving the field.
Yeah. And then obviously this week playing against the Titans, it's not a game where you necessarily ding anyone for playing them. Yes, their defense deserves a little bit of respect, but I don't think that we need to have any kind of worries about him. And so far, the Titans have allowed the 10th most running back fantasy points.
Before we move on to the next tier, though, if you are finding this for the first time, welcome in. Hit the subscribe button. You've made it 10 minutes into this video. You're obviously enjoying what you're watching. Come find out some more videos because you will not regret it. The B tier, we're going to tick it off with Josh Jacobs, Chase Brown, Ashton Genty, Jordan Mason, Travis Etienne, Alvin Kamara, and Kenneth Walker. Feels like everybody wants to talk about Jordan Mason this week, Tom. Is there any chance you could potentially sneak him into that A tier?
Well, Jordan Mason gets to play the Bengals, so that's always going to help. The Bengals defense still looks just absolutely rubbish. And while a couple of years ago, when they had success with Jake Browning, they had a reasonable defense, not necessarily a good one. This current one is really going to make life difficult for the Bengals in general. I think that you look at what they've done through 2 weeks, the Bengals, they've given up the third most fantasy points to running back position. They haven't been strong there whatsoever. I think that this would very much suit the Vikings to be able to give Jordan Mason 20, 25 touches. He's looked really good through the season so far. He's forcing missed tackles at a high rate. He's been, he takes contact quickly, but then his yards after contact has been really solid. And yeah, it's tricky for me to push him ahead of some of these guys because he's not necessarily much of a pass catcher. And with Carson Wentz at quarterback, is Carson Wentz going to check down an awful lot because he does have a bit of mobility? There's enough unanswered stuff where I can't push him too much higher, particularly. But you look at Josh Jacobs at the top of this tier going up against Cleveland, who just absolutely annihilated the Ravens running game. Would it be a surprise if Jordan Mason finished ahead of him? No, not particularly.
No, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting matchup. I always like to see it a little bit before I fully believe it with some of these handcuff guys that get forced into full roles because, there is potential they bring somebody in who could take some of that workfield away. One person who is potentially losing some work, though, one of the, I guess, good stories of the fantasy season so far, Travis Etienne. He's absolutely producing phenomenally through 2 weeks, but 64% running back rush share in week 1, down to 58% last week. We saw Baishal Tutin starting to emerge, looking really explosive, getting some manufactured touches in the passing game. Are you nervous that we could start to see more work head towards Tutin rather than Etienne over the next few weeks?
Yeah, and for good reason, because Tutin in week 2 on a per touch basis was stated by fantasy points. His yards per touch ranked 5th among 33 running backs. His missed tackle forced ranked 4th. His explosives per touch ranked 6th. So Tutin was doing good things when he was there. Obviously, he had the screen pass for the touchdown, which he was in on. So I think what Tutin does well is going to appeal at times. And this week, the Jags are taking on the Texans, and the Texans are going to bring pressure. The Texans are going to bring pressure at a high rate, which is going to force Trevor Lawrence to move the ball out quickly. So is that going to be in the shape of Travis Etienne catch passes or Baishal Tutin? Honestly, I couldn't answer that. It's really difficult to know. Lawrence hasn't been particularly good at checking down so far this year. He has a 1.4% check down rate, which ranks 3rd lowest. But it would be nice to see him getting the ball out quickly this week. And I'm a little bit worried that this game ends up not having as much fantasy value as we potentially like.
Hopefully not, because I've got plenty of shares of players that were played in that game. But let's move on. The next tier we have got James Conner, Javonte Williams, Breece Hall, Chuba Hubbard, Kyren Williams, and Jaylen Warren. It feels like some of these guys are hugely outproducing their draft capital and what they're doing. But 2 guys that are slightly disappointing at the moment. James Conner, we're starting to see Trey Benson emerge, and Kyron Williams, we are seeing more and more Blake Corum each week. Are you nervous that these could turn into more backfields by committee rather than these two being the bell cows that they were drafted to be?
Well, the Arizona one's particularly interesting because they play against the San Francisco 49ers this week. And last week, they were playing with a lead for so much of a game. It's like, was the usage of Trey Benson, was that really what they intended? Or was it because they just simply were stomping all over the Panthers till the Panthers came back into the game later? So very much intrigued by this one. Obviously, the Niners should be a much tougher defense. They should make life a lot harder for the Cardinals in general, which maybe that swings things back to the experienced handed James Conner. I don't think it's necessarily a great matchup for fantasy purposes for running backs on either side. Well, for James Conner or Trey Benson. So yeah, I do have little bits of concern there. And then Kyron Williams, like, it just feels like this has just been the slow crawl to inevitability, really, hasn't it? Like, Kyron Williams just isn't a complete running back. Yes, they paid him to a decent level, but Sean McVay talked after this week's game where Blake Corum had about 35% of touches, saying that's about the ideal split for them. Now, Jarquez Hunter was active but only playing on special teams. If he starts to get a few touches as well, does this start to lose fantasy value? But for now, I mean, I'm not surprised to see Blake Corum getting work around the goal line when you think back to him in college, and that was one thing he was very good at doing, was pounding the ball into the end zone.
Yeah, I think that I describe Kyron Williams as like a nice jab. Like he's solid, he's reliable, he keeps defenses honest. You know, he's effective, but he's never going to knock someone out. And I just feel like this offense, you know, with Puka, with Devontae Adams, like again, they're both incredible receivers doing phenomenal work in the passing game. But this offense just needs a spark, just needs a little bit of explosive to complement them. And Kyron Williams is not that. He is just really reliable. And I do wonder if we start to see the hope that maybe Blake Corum can, you know, create a splash play out of nothing and give that bit of juice.
I think we've got to touch on two other guys in this one, but let's start on Breece Hall, because if Tyrod Taylor's in there, do you think that this is a game which is going to flow through Breece Hall a lot more? Obviously, we spent a lot of time this offseason talking about Braylon Allen and the impact he could have. The Bucs, you know, they're not exactly an easy team to run on because their defensive line can be quite beefy and quite difficult to deal with. But over the last 2 weeks, they've allowed the 11th most fantasy points to running back position. They're not exactly a team so far that hasn't given up that. And we know the Jets' lasting pass rate over expected, and that was with Justin Fields out there. So do you think that Breece Hall is a sneaky play?
I think that Breece Hall is absolutely a sneaky play, but less for what he'll do on the ground and potentially more for what he'll do in the air. I think that Tyrod Taylor, at this point in his career, is not a quarterback that's going to be pushing the ball downfield. I think there's going to be a significant amount of work, you know, in and around the line of scrimmage. You look across the last 2 years, it's both this year attempts that he's made and last year in 2024 with the Jets. Over 60% of his passes were below 10 yards downfield. Like, he is a bit of a check down Charlie. And we know that's the role that Breece Hall plays. And the Jets don't really have a receiver that does that outside of maybe Mason Taylor. So I wouldn't be shocked to see 6, 7, 8 target game this week for Breece Hall.
Yeah. No, and then just the other guy who kind of stands out to me is Jaylen Warren. Similarly, with receiving work, Aaron Rodgers on Wednesday saying that he thinks they need to get him more targets and more work, which, coming on the back of Caleb Johnson's special teams gaff, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Caleb Johnson's inactive this week. Like, if you're not playing special teams, if you're not involved in the running game, then why be active? And we've mentioned this in the other videos, but the Patriots defense is a stinker at the minute against the pass. They allow a league high 13.5 yards per route run. I think that Jaylen Warren could really have a very strong day this week.
Yeah, I love Jaylen Warren. I love the usage. I can't quite rank him higher because Kenny Gainwell is still floating around. Like, played over 40% of snaps last week, ran a route on 46% of passing plays. Like, can we just get rid of Kenny Gainwell and ride Jaylen Warren, and then we can bump him up probably a tier, if not maybe even 2? But as long as Kenny Gainwell is floating around and being annoying, it does cause a little bit of nervousness for me around Jaylen Warren, which is why, it's not a bad ranking. If you've got him as your RB2, you're probably quite happy, but it's a little bit down here in the C tier. Before we move on to the D tier, though, if you've got any start-sit questions, Tom and I will be answering 100% of those comments we get all the way up to kickoff. So get them in the comments down below, and we'll help you set those lineups perfectly. Moving into tier D, this is a mix of guys that could potentially be losing their jobs and some guys that are causing us a slight bit of a headache. Let's start with Omarion Hampton, Tom. Plenty of hype about him in the offseason. He obviously shot up draft boards before redraft season. What's going wrong, and do you feel confident starting him this week?
No, I don't feel confident starting him. And I mean, look, we had Matthew Berry on this channel who declared him his ride or die and obviously spoke glowingly about him. And look, Matthew was clear that he was taking a risk on selecting someone like Omarion Hampton. He was like, some years you take somebody who's a layup, but this year he felt so much confidence in him, and it just hasn't worked out at all. I'm not saying that Matthew had bad arguments for it. I thought he had really good, valid arguments. But the Chargers, their first in pass rate over expected. Everything's going to the wide receivers, throwing to running backs at a 12% rate, which is very low, the same rate the Ravens are throwing to running backs. And when Omarion Hampton is getting the ball, it doesn't look impressive. Najee Harris looked okay this week. It wouldn't surprise me to see Najee Harris have more of a game this week. And going against the Broncos defense, I don't have much faith starting Omarion Hampton at all.
Yeah, I mean, part of the issue with Hampton is what's being blocked up for him up front. He's averaging 3.1 yards per attempt so far this year. He's averaging 2.83 yards after contact per attempt. Like, that's not much space that the offensive line are giving him. Hopefully, if defenses are going to have to start keeping an extra man out of the box to combat this incredibly pass-heavy offense, maybe it might start to open up some rush lanes for Hampton a little bit more. One player that I do want to touch on before we move on, though, Tom, Tony Pollard. It feels like the rushing volume has been incredible, but there's just non-existent passing usage. Do we think that we're going to see this? Is this a Cam Ward issue? Is this an offense issue? Or is it just one of those freak things that happens through 2 weeks and we'll start to see Tony Pollard get some targets moving forward?
Well, I believe going back to college, Cam Ward wasn't particularly passing to running backs at a particularly high rate. Now, look, I don't get involved in the college side of things as much as yourself, so maybe you can point me in the right direction more on that. But Cam Ward, for his part, is last in yards per attempt among all quarterback starters at 4.7. He's taking sacks at a rate of 16.7%. So nothing's coming easily for this offense. And when he does have enough time to pass the ball, I think he is just trying to push it downfield and get things moving there. The Colts, who Pollard plays this week, don't have a particularly good defense. They play fast. They want to put up points. And I think maybe that can help the Titans actually settle down with this game being in Tennessee. And maybe for the first time since Cam Ward got to the NFL, he can have a bit more of a relaxed game. And maybe that benefits Tony Pollard.
Yeah, and on the Cam Ward point, it's difficult to draw these direct comparisons because, yes, in college last year with Miami, we saw Damian Martinez get 17 targets. That was the most among any running back in Miami. But Damian Martinez, big, bruising back, not really a great pass catcher. So it's like, is that scheme thing? Is that a Martinez thing? Is that a Cam Ward thing? It's difficult. But through 2 weeks, it definitely looks like he's not pushing the ball to the running backs, as certainly a Tony Pollard owner over here would like to see. RE tier, these are guys that are potentially starting to get phased out. We've got David Montgomery, Ramondre Stevenson, Isaiah Pacheco, Zach Charbonnet, and then some other headaches, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Cam Scatterbo, and Byshal Tootin. If there was anyone in this tier, Tom, that you would expect to potentially jump 2 tiers by next week, who do you think that could be?
Well, it's tough. I mean, we talked about Tootin already when we talked about Etienne. Obviously, he is a player on the rise. Cam Scatterbo seems to have the goal line work locked in for the Giants, and also after Tyrone Tracy slagged off the play calling for the Giants a little bit, Scatterbo got a bit more run out. So maybe he's somebody who can have a bit more of a climb, but going up against the Chiefs' run defense, I'm not sure if it'll come this week. Obviously, Quinshon Judkins in there as well, somebody who could be on the rise. But Trevion Henderson, look, Trevion Henderson committed 3 penalties last week and 3 holding penalties. And I think that directly contributed to him being taken off the field. He had 19 snaps last week compared to 39 for Ramondre and 10 for Antonio Gibson. And the wheel route, which Ramondre caught and took for a touchdown, was meant for Trevion Henderson, but he wasn't in the game. Mike Rabel said as much after the game, and it sounded like that would have been one that would have gone to Trevion, but because of the holding penalties, they'd taken him out of the game for a bit. And obviously he loses out. Now, I expect them to go back to Trevion Henderson this week against the Steelers defense, who they've been giving up missed tackles forced at like one of the highest rates in the league, which is going to happen when you've got Patrick Queen in your defense. Like the Steelers, they've surrendered the 12th most explosive plays. The Steelers surrendered 12 explosive plays to the Seahawks alone in week 2. That is a huge number. So I very much expect them to want to try and be explosive against them.
Yeah, I would also say with Trevion Henderson, as a result, he had 2 pass protection snaps last week. Both were flagged for penalties, and one of them he still managed to give up the sack despite holding. So as a guy who's, bell cow, I think some people call him the best pass protecting back coming out of college in the last 10 years. It's not the great start, and certainly something that will get him off the field. The final tier, the F tier, is pretty much who's who of backups, touchdown-reliant guys, but Tyler Algier has seen significant usage on the ground. Do you think that there's a world where the Falcons could get up and maybe Tyler Algier could sneak into that flex play territory?
Well, I mean, Tyler Algier should be rostered in every single league because we just see this constantly. Like, he is useful. He has a role. He is good enough where he could be a starter on a number of these teams in the leagues. Like, Tyler Algier is better than any of the running backs in New York. I think that he's better than any of the running backs in Cleveland. I'd take him over any of the running backs in Jacksonville. Like, I'm very high on Tyler Algier. I mean, Tyler Algier would be a league winner in Dallas, in my opinion. But, like, he's not going to necessarily be week in, week out reliable, but like bye week starts soon. Tyler Algier's had 26 carries in 2 games, got the touchdown last week, finished last year 10th in explosive run rate, 7th in juke rate. And I just think that he's incredibly valuable and should be rostered absolutely everywhere. Whether we see him have a monster game this week or not kind of depends on how you think the game will go. But playing against the Carolina Panthers, is there a chance that by the 4th quarter, Tyler Algier is getting a lot of garbage time? Definitely.
Yeah, and I think if you're in this territory, you're hoping for maybe 40 yards and a touchdown and sneak in 10 points. That's absolutely within the range of outcomes for Tyler Algier this week. One person I want to touch on, Najee Harris as well. We talked about Hampton earlier. Najee Harris saw a huge spike in workload from week 1 to week 2, 35% of snaps, 47% running back rush share. Do you think that could continue to increase, or do you think we're going to see Hampton start to have more of that work back?
I think Najee is definitely going to continue to earn more of that. I mean, going up against a tough defense this week in the Broncos, who really could give a rookie trouble, whereas Najee Harris has held his own. He's an experienced veteran. I think that this is the kind of week where I wouldn't be surprised if Najee Harris played more snaps than Amari Hampton.
No, absolutely. And that is it for the running backs here. If you want to understand the rankings for the other positions, you can watch these videos right now. But hit the like, hit the subscribe, and of course, get those start sit questions in the comments down below.